Welcome back to Quilt Museum TV from the National Quilt Museum. Right now we're standing in the middle of the exhibit 13th Quilt Japan. Let's go to our curator, Rachel Barr, to give us more information about this exhibit.
Hello, my name is Rachel Barr and I'm curator at the National Quilt Museum. I'm excited to tell you about our latest exhibition, 13th Quilt Japan. This is part of a competition that is presented every 2 years by the Japan Handicraft Instructors Association. In Japan, they learn quilting or handcraft a very different way than we do in America. The quilters, they will go to school, earn certificates, so it's a very formalized process. The Japan Handicraft Instructors Association is made up of 12,000 people teaching lace work, leather craft, flower craft, quilting certainly, and other kinds of handcrafts. There are over 6,000 of those instructors are quilters, so you know that the Japanese are passionate about quilting. This international competition has two categories, contemporary and traditional. For this exhibition, all of the quilts are from Japanese artists, even though more than 12 countries are represented in the overall competition. There are over 30 quilts here in this exhibition. It will be here until January the 15th. I'd like to point out some of the quilts that are in either category. The first is called Ring, and it was the Grand Prix Award winner. Another quilt that I'd like to point out to you was called Prayer for Peace. Prayer for Peace is another more of a traditional quilt. But all of these, even though there are traditional patterns, they're using modern fabrics. And so that always gives it a fresh, new look. So even though you may be looking at it and seeing something that's familiar to you, it's a very contemporary piece. Spinning for a Happy Moment was done by a quilt artist who has made many quilts with the rose motif. This one is her very last, and she completed it just before her 80th birthday. Some of the contemporary quilts include Endless Waves, a very unusual looking quilt. It's cut more on a diagonal with an ombre effect. Another contemporary quilt was called Triangles to My Heart's Content. So if you look closely at this quilt, there are triangles within triangles and then larger sections of triangles with bright, bold, vibrant colors. 13th Quilt Japan is an exhibition you don't want to miss. It's an opportunity to see contemporary and traditional quilts that are one of a kind. This exhibition will be at the National Quilt Museum through January the 15th. Thank you.
In this episode, we're starting a new segment called Preservation Corner. In this segment, our registrar and curator are going to demonstrate some of the steps that we take in preserving the quilts here at the National Quilt Museum and give tips on how to preserve your own quilts. Let's go to Laura and Rachel for this segment.
Hi, I'm Laura Hendrickson, Registrar and Collections Manager here at the National Quilt Museum. I'm joined today by our curator, Rachel Barr. People often ask us how we fold and store our quilts, so in today's video segment, we're going to show you how we do it here at the National Quilt Museum. When the quilts come down from the gallery or come out of storage, they come to this room here in Curatorial, and we lay them flat on these tables. To start the process of handling and storing our quilts, we always wash our hands to remove oils from our skins, and we wear white cotton gloves when we touch the quilt or anything that the quilt is touching. The quilts rest between 2 layers of clean cotton sheets. So we're going to pull the top layer off of this quilt. And we always lift up to move the sheets so that the surface of the fabric isn't dragging on the surface of the quilt. And the quilt that we're looking at today is called The Blade by Doreen Speckman. So we're going to actually fold this quilt and put it back into the box that we keep it in when it's not on display in the gallery. So to start with, I've pulled off 2 pieces of long tissue paper, and this is acid-free tissue paper. We use archival quality materials. When you're storing a quilt, you don't want to use regular tissue paper because it can release acids that can cause deterioration in the quilt. So I'll talk a little bit more about the tissue paper and the container we're going to use in just a moment. So to start with, we have the 2 long pieces of tissue paper that are about the same width as the quilt. We're going to twist them, and then where we place the tissue paper on the surface of the quilt depends on the size of our container. This is the box this quilt is going in today, so depending on what you use to store your quilt, you may fold it at different lengths or widths. So we know the dimensions of the boxes that we use, so we know basically how far in to place the tissue paper for our first fold. So we're going to bring this section of the quilt up and over the paper, and this is to create a curve instead of a hard crease in the fabric. If you don't have something here to support the quilt at its folds, it crushes those fibers, which can lead to deterioration or breaking of the fibers down the road. We'll twist our second piece and place it right at the edge of the quilt on the inside, and then go over that again. And then from this point forward, we'll continue to roll it or fold it. And for this quilt, you might be able to see here at the end, we've got the label outermost so that we can actually tell which quilt this is without actually having to unfold the entire quilt. So 2 smaller pieces of tissue paper, again twisted, will help us pad the quilt for the next fold. Let's bring it down the table just a little bit. So we'll lift up. And then I'll lift beneath the quilt, supporting all of its weight, and set it inside the box. We do have a little space in our box. This is a smaller size quilt. Ideally, you don't want a container that's too large, and you certainly don't want one that's too small. I already had a piece of tissue paper lining the bottom of the box. And now I'll add one to the top. And it's tucked in around all sides so that there is tissue paper between the entire surface of the quilt and the box itself. Our tissue paper is acid-free and unbuffered, and our boxes are acid-free, lignin-free, and buffered. So those terms mean a few different things. Buffered versus unbuffered, to start with. If something is buffered, it means that it has an alkaline substance added to it, like calcium carbonate, and that provides a buffer or a barrier against acids to help prevent deterioration. Most of the quilts that we have, and a lot of the quilts that people will have at home, are made of cotton fabrics. But some materials, like wool and silk, they should not be stored directly against a buffered material. So our tissue paper is unbuffered, because we have quilts that we might have quilts with mixed materials, or quilts that we don't actually know for sure if there are other materials besides cotton. We don't endorse any particular brand over another, but we do use Gaylord materials, Gaylord Archival, and if you're interested, we'll include a link with the information for the video to show you the materials that we buy and what we've used today. When you're deciding what container to store your quilt in, there are several factors to consider. You want chemical stability and physical stability. A box like this helps protect the quilt. It makes it easier to move around. You may not need to access your quilt very often, but you do want to take it out and refold it every so often so that you're giving that fabric where it has previously been folded a chance to relax, and then you can fold it in different areas. Materials like plastic and wood are generally not safe for storage of textiles. They can give off acids again that can deteriorate the quilt, and you don't want to use any kind of tissue paper that isn't archival quality. If you don't have access to these kinds of materials, you can also use clean cotton sheeting. You want a cotton that isn't dyed, so we've got the white sheets here, and it does need to be washed, but you want to keep it as clean of chemicals as you can. And then something like this, we have a storage vault that we keep all our boxes in, but if you're going to put your quilt away for a long time, you may also want to consider wrapping it in plastic as a protection against leaks or flooding. To go back a little bit to when we were folding the quilt on the table, you notice that we started at one end and worked to the other. It isn't as important how wide your folds are as to where you put them. Most people tend to fold their quilts in halves and quarters, and so a lot of quilts often have very hard permanent creases along those lines. So anytime that you can avoid folding your quilt in halves and quarters, it's better. And then if you open up a quilt and you can see permanent creases, avoid folding them on those creases in the future. The National Quilt Museum is home to hundreds of beautiful works of fiber art, and preservation is a top priority for us. We know that people trust us to care for their works into the future, and we are happy to be able to provide a safe home for them. Look for more videos like this one in the future. For more information about how we care for our quilts, or for more tips and tricks on how to care for your own. Thank you.
A few weeks ago, artist Marilyn Belford came to the Quilt Museum to see her exhibit, which is currently in the corner gallery, and talk about why she's so passionate about mythical quilts. Let's go to that interview.
Hi everyone, I'm Marilyn Belford, and I'm delighted to have a show here at the Quilt National Museum, and I'm just happy to be here. And my work looks so beautifully hung now. And the work is called Mythical Quilts, in which I deal with Greek mythology. I've always been someone who loves Sturm und Drang, and mythology is Sturm und Drang, all these gods and all the crazy things that they do and the life that they lead. And so I got involved in doing these mythological quilts. And one of my earlier mythological quilts is about Medea. Now, Medea was a sorceress, and she married this guy, Jason, and they had 2 sons together. And he, however, wanted to get ahead in life, and he decided he was going to marry the princess, Glaucus. And he went over to Medea and he says, "Hey, you got to get out, you know?" And so she said, "Well, I'm not sorry. I mean, I'm happy for you." And she gave him a golden gown to give to Glaucus. And when Glaucus put it on, she burst into flames. Now Jason and the king and everybody is after her. So she runs away to her grandfather, is the sun god, and he gives her a chariot drawn by a dragon to escape. But before that, you know, she was a sorceress. And when she heard that he was going to marry Glaucus and they were going to have children, she was kind of worried that they were going to they didn't want any heirs, any strange heirs, to come and claim the throne, so they were going to kill the children publicly. So she takes them and supposedly kills them privately. However, if you look at the one with her escaping, there's plenty of room in that chariot there for the 2 children. So I don't know, she was kind of a mean Medea. Oh, and how do I do this? Okay, I take, I have lots of fabric, so much fabric that my father would have said to me, "You know, you're gonna have to live out on the porch. No room for you." And I take the fabric, which is subtle, like I like to use a lot of batiks because batiks switch, so you can get shadows and things out of it, and or certain things. I don't use just prints or so. And so the next one that I did, I would say, well, one of them that I did was the Persephone Rising. And with Persephone Rising, she was abducted by Hades and taken to the underground to be his wife. And she lived with him very happily, so it seems. However, the earth was dying because Demeter, Persephone's mother, was hunting around and not taking care of the earth. So everything was turning black and dying, and so the gods got all together and they went down to Hades and said, we have to have Persephone back. So he says, okay, it's one of the gods. But however, he gives her a pomegranate to eat, and she eats 6 seeds, hence the seasons. 6 months of summer or warmer weather and 6 months of colder weather when the earth is letting go. And so I showed her coming out of the ground. There's this fiery background in the ground, and she's coming out. And wherever she's sort of touching, you could see the flowers are beginning to bloom. And one of my quilts is the Poseidon. Now, Poseidon is a man, an angry god, a god of the waters. And where can you find, if you want to make the body of this man, you can't really, where are you going to find him? So I made a joke. I go into the mall, and I'd go up to somebody handsome and I'd say, well, I'd like to make a quilt out of you, but that doesn't work. So there's another way. And the way to do that is to go online and you go look for something like He-Man or Raw or something like that. And so I did that. And I would find an arm of someone sitting there holding his arm like this. And then I would take a different wrist or thing and I turn it around. I say, no, it's too open. I want it closer or further away. And I would adjust this. I have a program on my computer. And I would adjust all of this. And then I would go and I would find the chest of a wrestler, and make sure if I turn it and tilt it and do all this and change certain things. And I change it. So it's not recognizable. It is not, you can do it. You can do it. And then I took on the Poseidon, I did take the thighs, just 2 thighs, of Michelangelo. And I also took one arm that's holding the trident, that also for the shortening, because Michelangelo was excellent in foreshortening, so he's holding the trident with that arm. And the face is that of my local contractor, upstate New York. So this was Poseidon. And the waters, I would just do the waters. I would take a little look at a wave here and a wave there, and I put them all together. This is called montaging. And I do that a lot with my work. And for instance, in Hippolyte hunting, for example, now I love horses and I know horses fairly well, but not enough really to do one. So I would go around and I'd look and I'd see a face of this horse. That was good, but this one's nose is flaring more. So I would take the nose of that one and put it on this one and make the ears go this way or that way and change it and move legs and carry around until I got a horse. And the woman, of course, well, that's easier for me because I can do that. But I would then look around as well for some of that. And the bird, now I couldn't use an eagle because that's the American symbol and we don't want to use something like that. So I had to find a bird that was does not represent any symbol. And I think it was basically a condor, but I changed that a little bit too. And I wanted him angry and ugly too. So I changed things and I did things with it. And I had him on a stone and a rock and she's shooting him because Hippolyte, was the queen of the Amazons and a very, very strong woman, of tribal women who did hunting and fighting and were very, very strong people. And I'd like to call up Jamie Wallen, who is a quilter, and he did 2 of my quilts, the Persephone Rising and my Hippolyte Hunting. And I think I would like him to tell you how he does that too. Jamie?
So actually, how I actually started doing the quilting, the surface quilting for Marilyn, was I was in a class, I was teaching a class, and one of my students was a friend of hers, and I didn't know that. And I happened to, off the cuff, say, my favorite designer and artist is Marilyn Belford. And she said, that's a really good friend of mine. And I said, I would do anything if I could do a few of her pieces, because I think they're absolutely exquisite. And so that's how I started doing some of the work that I've been doing for her. So with Persephone, what I did was, when I brought it in, because of the beautiful art, as you can see throughout the piece, I wanted to separate the pieces. I wanted to separate the stones to give it more detail. I wanted to make sure that not only the piecing that Marilyn did with the applique, with her body and the dress, but I wanted there to be drape and form to follow how that would flow. And I remember, and this is kind of a funny story, after I finished it, and she had it for a few months, and we were talking on the phone, and she said, you know, you're a typical guy. You gave her girl stuff. So I remember that was one of our funny things. So now I'm very cautious to be very true to the Roman and that mythological time, because that is important with her work. So, and then any of the other pieces, it really was a matter of positive and negative space, wanting to make sure that they could separate a little bit of trapunto to show off her amazing applique, just to make sure to get that depth and the photorealism that I think her work needs to come alive and off the fabric.
Thank you.
So, yeah.
Yes, Jamie is working on, I've switched a little bit from the Greek mythology, which you find here, to the Norwegian mythology. So I have, I've worked on the trolls, tree trolls, and the way they live. So I have a forest scene with trolls, and Jamie is doing the quilting on that.
Amazing, yeah.
And that will be ready in about another month.
Yep.
And it should be starting to go around, make its rounds at that particular time. And for me, I've been starting on something called Freya. She was a goddess, and she was Odin's wife. She was a goddess of just about everything, like beauty, war, hunting, anything, you name it, she was the goddess of that. And so I've been working on that. She had two cats, huge Norwegian forest cats. They're huge. So I have her standing there with her sword and the two cats, and she's able to turn people into birds. And so I have her there with her cape, the bird cape, and the feathers in her hair. So it's quite nice. You're going to love it, I hope.
I think so. I'm going to have to do a good job so you don't turn me into anything.
I'm not Freya. Anyway, so yeah. And when I do my work, I tend to use a steamer seam tool light, because when I like to make after I do that part where I play with it on the computer and so forth, I blow it up to big size, and I print it out on a program which will print it out on 8x11, and you paste it together. So I have my drawing large, and I make little mini copies in tracing paper, and that's where I trace out little sections, and I will take on clear acrylic paper and find a piece of fabric, then cut it out with the steamer seam 2 and put it on. Now, as I go along, if I don't like it, when you have steamer seam 2, you just peel it off and take another piece and put it on in its place. So you can really play with it like you would play if you were doing an oil painting or acrylic painting. You can change things and play with it, which is what I like. When you're finally settled with the whole thing, that's when you steam it and make it permanent. And then you do your little thread painting, tying the whole thing together, and do emphasis with thread, free motion stitching around the edges to make shadows, to make highlights a little bit more, to add twinkles in the eye and stuff like that. And then of course it goes to Jamie.
And it's already perfect. I mean, it really is.
Now I teach at the Academy of Quilting, which comes out of New Zealand. And it's a lovely place. I teach all these techniques that I'm talking about. So, And Jamie teaches all over.
All
He
over.
travels everywhere.
Everywhere.
And he teaches his quilting beautifully, beautifully. He's so right on the ball with everything. Just don't be afraid to experiment. You see something, it strikes you, do it. And sometimes if you make a mistake, you develop the mistake. You could get something really very, very spectacular and something totally new from something like that. So don't be afraid to go ahead and be yourself. If somebody will say, oh, but that doesn't quite look like the nose or right things. I like it. I'm the artist. I like it. That's the nose.
And time. Take the time. You're worth it.
Absolutely.
And that is a designated sacred time. I mean, the body of work she has, she wouldn't have that body of work if she came up with 5 million excuses not to go to the studio and work. And so that self-discipline of, this is my sacred time to finish these pieces, thank goodness, I would think is very important.
Well,
Thank you once again for watching this episode of Quilt Museum TV. A few reminders: if you'd like to be notified when future episodes go out, please follow the museum on YouTube and Facebook, and sign up to get emails at our website, quiltmuseum.org. Also, please remember that the National Quilt Museum is a 501c3 nonprofit organization, and we rely on people passionate about quilting for funding of the museum. For information on how to get involved with the museum, please go to quiltmuseum.org/get involved. Once again, thanks for watching. We'll see you next month on Quilt Museum TV.